Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And I'm still on the left. I'm David Jones.
And David Jones will always be on the left. Tonight we welcome Jeff Moseley, President and CEO of the Greater Houston Partnership. And Jeff, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, gentlemen. What a delight to be with you.
CEO, COO, what do you do exactly? How many jobs do you have?
I picked up the COO hat when Governor Christie reached down and tapped our COO, took Tracy to New Jersey to head up their economic development initiative called Choose New Jersey. So we do have a temporary vacancy, but we were very, very honored.
Wow, Rick Perry would call him a traitor.
Governor Christie's got an eye for talent, that's all I can say.
Yeah. So anyway, the partnership and this position that you have, how are y'all now meshing, you and the business community of Houston?
The Greater Houston Partnership's in a fascinating place because about 25 years ago, the historic Houston Chamber married Houston World Trade, married Houston Economic Development, all under this umbrella called the Greater Houston Partnership. We enjoy 2,100 business members, and it's a very fascinating, unique organization promoting policy, promoting jobs, going after leads and prospects, and fighting for our share of world trade.
What brought you to the job, and what do you think people who picked you for this job thought of your background that put you here?
Well, that is a fascinating question. At the time, I had been serving the last 6 years as head of economic development for the state of Texas when the search committee invited me to take a look at the head of the partnership. And I believe that really was what our strategic plan, the board was saying it was time for the partnership to focus more on fighting for high-paying jobs and growing the tax base. Our board is really looking at one really big tsunami coming in. That is, over the next 25 and 30 years, we know Texas will double from 25 to 50 million in population, and for Houston that means we add the population of Los Angeles. So we have to fight to bring these high-paying jobs to keep the tax base vibrant, to provide those basic services, and we think it's very, very intellectually dishonest not to think that we have to compete for those jobs.
And Gary, I'm sure you're going to bring up property taxes because this gentleman was once a county judge, but please spare us if you can.
Okay, well, I won't talk about property taxes yet, but I will talk about the Texas legislature just finished the session in July. And I know that the partnership has a very active legislative agenda. So, Jeff, give us your assessment. How did the Greater Houston Partnership do with its legislative agenda? And what does it mean for our community?
Well, our board felt like that it really was a rainy day and that the rainy day fund should be put to work to take care of basic essential needs. We felt like there should be increased funding for education and for health care. Regretfully, the legislature chose not to go quite as far as we felt like they should go. But overall, we were very pleased to see that the legislature agreed with us on funding the Grand Parkway, a $300 million improvement to a strategic segment of that roadway. The Grand Parkway is a 160-mile new ring road that will really enhance the Port of Houston and logistics and distribution for this area. We are also pleased that last session we worked with the legislature to create a fund account to allow University of Houston to go towards Tier 1 status. This legislative session, I don't have to tell you and the listeners, there was a big push to go grab that money and take it away, and we were able to hang on to that.
Well, that was a victory.
Yes, sir. We declare victory on that. So there were some bright spots in the midst of all the very difficult decisions.
How about this, Jeff? We now know, it seems, that the priorities that were set by the governor for that session had a whole lot to do with something else other than the vitality of the state, other than bringing jobs to Houston. I mean, now we know what all of that was about to some extent. So I guess
so what was that?
Well, it was called presidential nonsense. So when did you learn that basically, your business agenda didn't really matter to that administration? When did you figure that out, and when did you oppose it?
Well, we have
publicly. I mean, when did you say this is bad for Houston if this happens? Not you, but your organization, city leadership generally.
The Greater Houston Partnership is really blessed with strategic board leaders. We have 130 board members that represent companies that will do about $1 trillion in business every year. These board members enjoy very close working relationships with the governor, the lieutenant governor, the speaker, and leaders in the legislature. So we always enjoyed a very open line of communication with the governor and lieutenant governor and speaker and other officers. But it was clear that we would have differences of opinion. And in a very respectful way, we did choose to take positions that the legislature did not agree with. And so we agree to disagree. But, for example, the governor was at the partnership not too many days ago with the signature and signing of a tort reform bill that we did support. And we were pleased to host the governor and the Senate and House sponsors at the partnership when about 8 weeks ago it was announced that he had the intention on a loser pay initiative, and then he was back at our offices to do the signing about 2 weeks ago. So even though we agree to disagree on some of the funding priorities, we do enjoy a very close dialogue with legislative leadership.
You mentioned the rainy day fund and thought it was a rainy day in terms of state revenue, primarily because there was no big federal gift like we got 2 years ago for about $15 billion or more dollars, and because of the slow economy that everyone in the country faces. But what I've read is the rainy day fund has already been flushed. We've already committed basically to spend it as soon as the legislature shows up in the next session to pay for the overages that will come into play based on Medicaid. That's my understanding. I've heard that's another $5 billion. They're going to vote that right away, just like they did this time, using the rainy day going backwards, but also affords everyone a chance to say, we preserve the rainy day fund till the next session.
Well, I know you enjoyed having Terry Greer as one of your guests recently, so ask Terry and other leaders in public education if it's a rainy day. I know you enjoy a close relation with Dick Winerty and the Texas Medical Center, but talk to healthcare professionals about whether or not it's a rainy day. These are the voices that we hear and that our board listened to whenever they took their position to ask for more consideration of that fund account to be used.
So the taxes may come to the taxes that we have in this city and county, or for the most part, it's property taxes, or compared to other high-growth states, fairly low. Greer will tell us. Greer will tell us that we're way far below the cap on property taxes at HISD. So I guess the question is, now that the legislature has cost us $250 million in HISD, will you recommend that the superintendent and the school board raise that rate so that we can make up for what we lost thanks to the rainy day fund that you didn't get?
But to clarify, Jeff, before you go into that, Texas has some of the highest residential property taxes in the country. Am I not right?
We do, and we don't have a state personal income tax. So, yes, we do make some offsets. And there's funding formulas so that HISD is very close to becoming a donor district. So raising ad valorem taxes probably means that not too much of that money stays in the district and would be sent off to go to other parts of the state. So there are some very strong complexities to the funding formula, no doubt about it. This should be an interim study. We engaged on initial discussions on the margins tax. We'd be pleased to come back and talk about how that could be perhaps a remedy. But interim committee work, we believe, would be this would be a good priority to go in and talk about these funding formulas.
You mentioned that because realistically, the way we fund public education in the state is not sustainable, is it? Unless we're going to continue to raise property taxes on hardworking Texans.
It's extremely complex, and probably we don't need to be that complex. But as a former county office holder, I can remember very clearly the discussions about valuation and the need to go and get a correct and fair valuation. And then laws were enacted so that the assessments would be done in a transparent way so that everybody had an idea of how those assessments are being done. Well, immediately the appraisal district became the target of hate. But the reality of it is they were doing their job, and office holders were finding a way to game the system and let tax rates float so that it was, in fact, a taxation based on increased valuation. The way the law was really set up, though, is if my property valuations go up, my rate should be floating downward so my out-of-pocket is the same, and the revenues back to that governing entity are constant so they can make plans. But they've been gamed, and regretfully the formulas have gotten complex. And there's no doubt taxpayers are frustrated and should be frustrated.
Yeah, it's really pretty intellectually dishonest, our present system, because people's property taxes go up, in fact, and no one has ever voted in a political position to raise their taxes.
Exactly.
And all anybody wants to talk about is property taxes and not what is necessary to replace the income that you lose. That's big.
Well,
you never hear Gary say, here's what we should be taxing, whether it be people of wealth or means, to substitute for that which we're going to lose because we don't have property tax because of cuts.
Now, the partnership is on record also supporting tax revenues for mobility, for transportation. And here's the fascinating thing about our model for collecting revenues to build highways in Texas. It's based on how many gallons of fuel we buy to put in our automobile. The only challenge with that model is that automobiles are now more efficient. We drive farther on fewer gallons, and there's more automobiles demanding more capacity. So our model is flawed. We really need more revenues, and we're on record saying yes, license plate fees should go up. There should be a series of local options that should be approved, and so we support new revenue streams.
We can also charge per mile.
Yes, and we are open to that. That vehicle miles traveled, yes.
Do other states do that?
I think it's being tested and tried, but
okay, but let's go into this a little more, because the crisis we face in transportation in the state is pretty big. I mean, basically, the cupboard is bare. Haven't we committed?
We're out of money.
Yeah. They bonded to build projects, which they built, and
Yep.
I guess Grand Parkway's part of that. That's wonderful. But going forward, we've now got to pay off all those bills. So why are we not hearing from any significant players in Austin that maybe it's time to rework it, and maybe it's going to actually start costing the taxpayers of Texas a little more money if they want to have mobility?
Senator
Do you think
Corona,
that's a
Senator
I know,
Corona
he
from
did,
his neighborhood
but nobody else
wants to raise gas taxes.
Why has this become like a third rail? I don't get it. I mean, I think, and clearly, if you ask the people of Texas, what are your priorities from government? I think infrastructure should be up there toward number one. Maybe two after public safety. But certainly number two is going to be infrastructure.
Well, you know, Gary, it's really tempting to drive around Houston and say, what a magnificent city. Look at our roadways. Look at our towers of, all these office buildings, these beautiful structures. We've arrived. But the reality of it is, as Texas enjoys this doubling of population, and we add the population of Los Angeles to our region.
That's a scary thought.
Doesn't that give one pause for thought? And the reality is we're out of money. The funding formulas are not adequate. And yes, we should be focused on mass transit, light rail, freight rail, shipping. Our Port of Houston needs to continue to be updated. The airport system, the roadways, this entire intermodal system has to be a priority for Houston. Panama Canal opens in 36 months. The biggest vessel that can pass through there today carries 5,000 boxes. In 36 months, those vessels can carry 12,000 boxes. And Houston is already the monster of the Midway when it comes to ports along the Gulf, but we have to invest in the infrastructure to make sure the roads, the rail, the docks, the cranes, they have to be upgraded to accommodate this fact.
And we need to, how do we pay for this?
Well, the federal taxpayer, Gary, is offering us $900 million is what I understand, or at least that's our grant request, and we're laying track for the first time in a decade.
Oh, so, this is Metro he's talking about.
Yeah, I'm talking about Metro. So I guess the question is twofold. One is, what about the leadership of Metro under Grenius? Is the money going to flow? And will the Republican Congress, which doesn't want to spend on anything, going to let us get the continued support that we need to lay further rail?
Well, the partnership's been very pleased with Metro under Chair Gilbert Garcia and under George Grenius. We were in Washington with Metro not too many weeks ago, working with our congressional delegation, and what we're hearing from them is that they do share a commitment to fight for our fair share of federal dollars to continue to expand mass transit. So we know there's a long fight. We know there's a lot of competition for these dollars, and that we have to very much be competitive to get our fair share of these funds. But it's not uncommon at the federal level today to take trust and fund accounts like Port of Houston. There's actually a harbor fund account that we're paying into, but we're not getting money out of.
The same day I saw that story about the rail, Jeff, I saw that Eric Cantor was in town, and I thought, aha, he was speaking to the partnership, and I'm thinking, maybe they're actually talking to him about whether or not he wants to retract his statements that that type of spending is just contributing to the welfare state that he opposes. Did you soften him up a little bit on that?
We were very honored to have Majority Leader Eric Cantor here with us last Friday, And yes, we did have a chance to talk about some of the demands for capacity in our intermodal system, the need to upgrade Port of Houston and make it ready to become this destination for cargoes and logistics. We had the day before that the chairman of House Transportation. We were very, very pleased that he could be in town as well. And so for Chair Micah to be here and then Majority Leader Cantor, we had a real good time to talk about the need and just looking over the horizon immediately of ramping up and getting our infrastructure to meet those demands.
So you sound like Barack Obama, really, about infrastructure, as does Gary. This is interesting.
Yeah, except Barack Obama took the money for the stimulus and basically wasted it, David, as you know.
Jeff wants more. Jeff wants more is all I know.
Well, here's what we would just suggest. What a beautiful model Houston has to offer America. Look at Jesse Jones. And he headed up a federal agency. And this agency was to build infrastructure in America. In fact, under Jesse Jones, I think there was a turnpike built in Pennsylvania. The Hoover Dam was built, Golden Gate Bridge, massive infrastructure projects. And then when the agency was through, they did it through bonded debt. It cost the taxpayers nothing. The federal government has basically shut down and closed down in helping states, and it's left states to its own exotic brands of how to move forward. And so Texas was faced with this, and Governor Perry offered a option on this, which became controversial, and that's letting the private sector step up and help on investing in corridors. Well, what happens when the federales pull out and leave states to their own devices? You wind up with options that may not be as desirable to the taxpayers. But the reality of it is that was kind of the only thing that we could pursue.
Well, without additional
without the
fees for using the roads. Let's talk about the drought. This has been a pretty nasty summer. 3 weeks of over 100-degree temperatures. I was talking to Mayor Parker the other day, and she said we're now up to like 750 water breaks a day. It's going to start impacting the roads. We're going to have road collapses. We could have all kinds of things. And when the trees start dying, it is really bad. And we could be in a cycle that has nothing to do with global warming, but just normal weather cycles where we have a drought for 10 years. Are we ready to deal with this?
The beauty of living in Houston relative to the rest of the state is that we enjoy rain and water. So it is unusual for us to even get to 100 degrees. Our friends in Dallas and San Antonio, they're even 6 and 8 and 10 degrees hotter with much even less rainfall. By the way, humidity is good. And aren't we enjoying what little humidity we have to keep things a little bit green? Because these areas that have no humidity, they're literally burning up. But yes, we need to really use this time to focus on new measures and also forward thinking. You know, Louis Welch was out there talking about water, drainage, lakes, reservoirs. And so perhaps it's a great time for us to start looking at new technologies, maybe desalinization. Maybe this is the time that we begin talking about our future, adding the population of Los Angeles over the next 25 years. Where shall we find the water to run the jobs and the manufacturing and all the needs that come with that demand?
Well, let's not forget, Gary, and I hope this is going to be part of Jeff's agenda, that we need to beat back those mosquitoes. Now,
seen mosquitoes this summer?
There are bigger issues.
It's too dry for the mosquitoes,
Bigger
David.
issues than drought and mosquitoes to talk about, I can assure you. So the big one is, will we survive? Will you survive, and will Houston survive if we get a continued discussion in the national press about the Texas miracle that increasingly looks like it's phony? With the governor saying, what global warming, we got the hottest summers in the recorded history. Spending has never created a job. Of course, Jeff knows better than that. Overzealous regulators are killing jobs when, in fact, oil rigs are up in the state. I mean, and the Fed chairman is treacherous or treasonous. How can you survive, Jeff, in your job when you got the governor set that climate?
I believe that your point is well taken, David, that when there's a national campaign and there's a Texas candidate seeking that office, that the state as a whole is probably going to be subject to intense scrutiny, and some of it may be fair and some of it may not be fair. We know that when Governor Bush ran for president, the Gore campaign did a very intense scrutiny on Texas, and as a result of that, Houston was painted as having the worst air quality in America. Now, we didn't see those advertisements in Texas, but they were running all over America, And as a consequence, site selection professionals were reluctant to pick up the phone and call Mayor Parker or call business leaders to think about relocating and expanding their jobs in the Houston marketplace. I think the answer to your question is that we organically just gather up all these fabulous stories that are Houston-based, and we make sure that we work to get them out there. We have a program called Opportunity Houston, and we do that. There's just so much organic good news that happens in Houston. We were the last ones into the recession. We were the first ones out of the recession. We have a very dynamic job growth because we are 45% energy sector. We have the Texas Medical Center. We have aerospace jobs, and we have the Port of Houston. I mean, that's a great story, and it's a Texas story, and it's a Houston story, but we have to always fight to make sure that the facts are getting out there because they can be twisted.
But all I'm saying is no serious businessman in the United States who's thinking about moving his business to Houston would be happy to hear the leader of our state say that there's something unpatriotic about the Fed chairman appointed by your first boss, George Bush. I mean, it can't be good, Jeff, is all I'm saying. You can take a pass on this. I understand.
I want to talk about. Does the partnership, Jeff, has it been working on getting relief for Houston and Harris County and even indeed the region from regulatory overreaching by the state of Texas? I know we all complain about the federal government overreaching, but doesn't the state of Texas micromanage for the most part a lot of things that we do?
Well, we do work closely with state agencies. We work really closely with the environmental agencies because we are a refining complex. We carry the state and the nation on our shoulders. And that's why we've been pleased to team up with Senator Landrieu over in New Orleans, because she also shares this vision of where the Gulf Coast is carrying the nation, and yet the federal government doesn't really recognize. We get penalized for air quality. They draw the bright red line, but we don't get any money back to help us clean up our air, even though we're doing the refining that nobody else really wants to do. Think about that. And yet on federal lands where mineral wealth is extracted, they'll write Wyoming a check that'll turn back about 50% of that money to the state of Wyoming to offset the wear and tear on their highways and their infrastructure.
We're dealing with the anti-Texas mentality of the present administration. But let's talk about pensions. I mean, there is a pension crisis at or is going to come, not just in Texas, but around the country, for cities and counties and the state for that matter. And we've got a hard look at pension reform to make it so it is affordable and sustainable. What is the partnership doing in that regard?
Well, Mayor Parker invited us to step forward and really take a look at this challenge to our city. Everybody agrees, whether business or labor, that the Christmas tree is really getting a lot of ornaments on it, and it's really tilting, and the future doesn't look too good because of some very big promises made to pensioners. There needs to be a thoughtful way to look at how to reform the commitments, and more than likely the pathway would be to move from a defined benefit to a defined contribution. That means probably taking some of the pensions and showing them value to move to a 401k, identifying the shortfalls once you do that. And so that delta, you would find opportunities to issue bonded debt to pay out the delta, and ultimately fix this financial black hole for the city of Houston.
Let's just talk about the quality of political leadership that we have in this city. I think if you talk to the mayor confidentially, certainly the superintendent of public schools will tell you his school board is a challenge. No one can remember anything in the last decade that came out of the mouth of a city councilman that could fairly be said is progressive or is showing leadership. I mean, partnership has to be worried about the quality of these positions and who fills them, and term limits especially being a handicap.
Well, David, personally I would agree with you. Term limits probably don't help the city of Houston, and so we would want to encourage another look at that. I know there was a look during the White administration. Our board is really wanting to do what we can to work with our elected office holders. We think the voters have done a very good job of hiring elected office holders. The challenge at the federal level is seniority, and in about half a decade we're probably going to have our voice back, but the challenge is real, and that era ended, love him or hate him, with Tom DeLay going back to Mr. Sam. We've always had a tall Texas shadow, and so a lot of the things that we want to personalize, we didn't get a shuttle, we didn't get this decision, ultimately it goes back to seniority. And it's easy for us to make that personal, but if you look at it, what would it look like if we had the seniority that we did have? The reality of it is a lot of people would like Texas a lot more if we had seniority, and we don't have it. So that's our world that we're in, and so we're trying to do what we can to step up. We're going to make quarterly trips to Washington. We're going to take a mission to the Democratic National Convention, a mission to the Republican National Convention, and we are going to go to the inauguration in 2013. At a local level, we are looking at opening up several tools to help us. We're doing a survey that we want to kind of regionally poll and find out what issues are there for elected office holders to appreciate. We'll release that survey after Labor Day. We're looking at setting up a scorecard based on the resolutions that our board approves. We can showcase how elected office holders are meeting or not meeting business community standards.
I'm still not over that Jeff Moseley is going to the Democratic National Convention. But
go with him, David.
Thanks for being here and announcing that.
David volunteers to go with you.
And we invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar, red, white, and blue. Watch the shows, a follow-up discussion. And until next time, get informed and get active.